Now we're going to talk about how to detox your food and your meals. And the first recommendation we have for you is to buy organically grown food, or even better, grow some of your own organically grown food. And Joe can tell you all the wonderful reasons why this is so important.
So the good news is that when people eat organically grown foods rather than chemically grown foods, they improve their health. There's a lot of research showing that people who eat organically grown food have less cancer, less disease, less cardiovascular disease, less dementia. The children are smarter. I could go on and on and on. The problem is with these chemically grown foods is not only are they low in nutrients that we need, like vitamins and minerals, but more importantly, they're contaminated with herbicides and pesticides and heavy metals. So for example, if a person is eating a lot of soy, soy has lots of benefits. But if those soybeans are grown with high phosphate fertilizers, those high phosphate fertilizers are often contaminated with cadmium. And cadmium is incredibly damaging to the bones. So not only does it do things like displace calcium, but it actually poisons the osteoblasts that are supposed to be producing our bone. And they also damage the kidneys. So kidneys can't convert 25-hydroxyvitamin D into 1,25-dihydroxyvitamin D. I can give example after example of chemical metal toxins that are in food that damage our bodies. So eat organically. And the good news is that eating organically, within less than 4 days, most of the toxins will leave the blood. Now, unfortunately, there's still many toxins in the fat. It can take a while to get rid of them. But you can get your blood levels down pretty quickly by eating organically grown foods rather than chemically grown foods.
So about 3 years ago now, I think, maybe it's 4, dear, our children gave us a kit to make a greenhouse. And Joe created this wonderful greenhouse for us, and we're growing food in it. Even through the winter, we tried growing some things this year. And we'll try to share some photos with you of our, we can't walk around in this interview, but we'll try to share some photos with you of our greenhouse and what's growing in there. Sorry, we've got that video. And how we go about the process of making these things happen. You can also grow some things just in pots on your patio or on your deck. And it's really not hard to do, and it's really fun. So yeah.
I want to add to that. So I was lecturing in Toronto, I think about 3 years ago, with one of my really bright graduates, Dr. Gaetano Morello. He's a naturopathic doctor who actually has hospital privileges in Vancouver. Anyway, we were talking about health, which we always enjoy doing. And he made a comment to me, which really struck a chord. He said he noticed that all of his oldest patients grow their own food. Well, I thought that was really interesting. So is it the food they're growing is healthier, or is it just getting outside and being with nature is promoting their health? But then I looked at my own family. I have the great fortune of having known my great-grandfather, who died when I was 10 years old. So my great-grandfather lived to 95, had a no apparent disease, never saw a doctor in his life, and grew a lot of his own food. My grandfather also lived to 95, very low disease, grew a lot of his own food. My dad, I loved dearly, did not grow his own food, died much earlier at age 88 with a lot of chronic disease. So growing our own food appears to be really important.
Okay, the next thing that we would like to recommend is that you do not buy food in cans or packaged in plastic wrap. And Joe will explain why.
We, as our community and public health have become aware of toxins, we've engaged a number of measures to try to decrease toxic load in the population. One of the best ones was recognizing how toxic lead is. So they removed lead from gasoline, but they also removed lead from cans, because in the past, cans were soldered with lead to seal them. Well, they replaced that now with glue, and they also then, with the cans itself, they lined the inner part of the can with plastic to keep any more toxins coming from the metals of the cans. Well, the problem is the plastics they used are full of bisphenol A. So when people eat food that's in cans, it no longer leaks in lead, which is good, but now it leaks in bisphenol A. And we look at bisphenol A, there's a direct correlation with things like multiple sclerosis, okay, diabetes, and a lot of other health problems. So if you're going to make soup, for example, you can buy soup in a can or you can make it yourself. If you buy that soup in the can, there was one study done looking at lentil soup. They found that lentil soup in cans had 12 times the levels of bisphenol A as lentil soup people made themselves. Another study looked at soy milk. They compared soy milk in glass versus soy milk in cans. The soy milk in cans had 16 times the levels of bisphenol A. You might say, well, okay, so why is that important? It turns out that 1 8-ounce glass of soy milk a week or 2 servings of soup in cans a week will double a person's risk of diabetes. And that's just one toxin. Okay. Then you start looking at food that's wrapped in plastic. So any food that has fat in it, like meat, for example, when you wrap it in plastic, well, guess what? The plasticizers, like bisphenol A, then leak into the meat. So it's really important that we do everything we can to not eat foods that have been stored in plastics. And even though it might be in a can, you don't think a can is being plastic. Can's lined in plastic. So we only want to eat foods that are in glass, if at all possible, or Tetra Paks. Now, Tetra Paks use a form of plastic that does not leak into the food. Sometimes you have to buy foods that are in plastic. So as soon as you get it home, put in a glass container. And when you get home, make sure all your plastic containers have been thrown away. You don't want plastic containers. You only want glass or stainless steel or ceramic.
We'll share some pictures of the glass containers that we use. They're Pyrex, and they're wonderful. Like you can freeze in them, you can reheat in them, and they don't put a lot of garbage into your food. Also, Joe didn't mention that bisphenol A. You see things are bisphenol A free, and they're using a different bisphenol. And I'll let Joe talk about this. He's much better at it than I. But bisphenol A free does not mean bisphenol free.
Yeah, that's a really important point. So as research grew showing that bisphenol A causes a lot of troubles and consumers started saying, we don't want to buy bisphenol A containers anymore, they say, okay, fine, we'll make them bisphenol A free. And all these containers now say bisphenol A free. Good. But they replace them with bisphenol S, bisphenol F, bisphenol AF, bisphenol Z. And it turns out the animal research shows these things are just as toxic as bisphenol A, and some are even more toxic. Like bisphenol S appears to be very damaging to a man's ability to produce sperm. Okay, so we're now inducing infertility. And bisphenol S is also worse in terms of binding to insulin receptor sites, making people more susceptible to diabetes. So if you look at the research in NHANES, which is this big national database in the US, where we look at the levels of things like bisphenol A in people, good news is that it's been going down. But the problem is all the other bisphenols have been going up. So the net total bisphenol load has not gone down. So we must avoid bisphenols, which means you have to avoid plastic.
Yeah, including the receipts that come through, the receipts that slip through that are soft at the store. Take as few of those as you can. Unless you really need them, don't take them because they're coated in bisphenol to get it through the machine. Joe mentioned Tetra Paks. For those of you who don't know what those are, they're the boxes that they now have for soup, and you can get beans in them. They are made of they have a type of plastic called polyethylene, which seems to be okay. It's in the lining of the box, but it doesn't seem to migrate into the food. So we're not big fans of plastic. Much prefer that you make your own soup at home or cook your own beans at home with the help of an Instapot. It's really easy to do that. But if you just hate cooking or you're really pressed for time, try to get the food in Tetra Paks. You can get soup, alternative milks, like soy milk, is packaged in those, and those are relatively safe. Okay, Joe talked a little bit about storing food in glass containers. Glass should always be your first choice for storing your own home-cooked foods, or if you're purchasing packaged foods, you transfer them to glass as soon as you get home. And then again, the Tetra Paks are good for beans and soups. They're a decent alternative. The last thing you can try to do to detoxify your food is to get rid of non-stick pans and cookware. And Joe can tell you why.
So nonstick pans are really convenient. As we ourselves have moved away from nonstick pans, it's more work cleaning them up. But those nonstick pans, while the food may not be sticking to the pans are sticking to the food, it appears. So when people are using these nonstick coatings, they build up in the body what are called perfluorinated compounds, PFOAs and PFOSs and things of this nature. Why might they be a big problem? Well, these things are very toxic to human beings. They're particularly toxic to, for example, the thyroid. If you have a person that has a low thyroid, you wonder why is that happening? Well, it could be that these PFOAs are blocking the ability of the thyroid to function properly. Not only that, but these things then now are getting into the water supply. There's many areas, I think right now, some research I looked at in Great Britain showing that the water supplies are being contaminated with these things. So it's not just the direct protection of ourselves from stuff from the pans we're using, but we're now also, these things are going into the environment and even poisoning the water supply. There are just so many examples of these chemicals, which on the short term make our lives easier, but in the long term, they pollute the environment and they pollute our bodies and they increase our incidence of disease. I don't know if people are aware, we now suffer the highest burden of chronic disease in every age group ever in human history. Our genetics have not changed. Something else changed. Yes, our food supply has lower levels of nutrients in it because of chemical growing of foods. But a far bigger factor is we have saturated our environment and our bodies with metals and chemicals that poison our enzyme systems. So we get more disease.
So we know you're here because of the primarily interested in the connections of all this to bone health. And so I'd like to just make a few comments about that now. You want to ensure that to lower your toxin load, you want to ensure that your intake of bone supporting minerals is optimal. Suboptimal or unhealthy nutrition increases your absorption of environmental toxins like heavy metals. When you're not getting enough of the healthy minerals, especially calcium, you will absorb more of the unhealthy ones like lead and cadmium, particularly if you're taking vitamin D. So why is this? It's because vitamin D increases our intestinal cells' production of a protein called calcium binding protein. Calcium binding protein facilitates our absorption of minerals. It prefers to help us absorb the good ones, calcium particularly. But when calcium isn't present, calcium binding protein will also help us absorb other beneficial minerals, including strontium, which is why we always tell you to take your strontium separated from calcium. Magnesium, copper, zinc, iron, and selenium will all be facilitated, their absorption by this method of calcium binding protein. But when these healthy bone building minerals, especially calcium, are not around, then calcium binding protein will increase your absorption of toxic elements like lead, arsenic, and cadmium. So it's really important that you ensure a healthy balance of good minerals in your diet and in your supplements. A key takeaway for you here is that the presence of calcium will greatly decrease your gastrointestinal absorption of lead. This is very well accepted. It's been confirmed in many studies. Calcium deficiency has been shown to increase lead absorption and retention. Low consumption of calcium and also low vitamin D, because it promotes our production of calcium binding protein and thus enables our active absorption of calcium from the digestive tract, are considered risk factors for elevated levels of lead and other heavy toxic metals in your bones. They even have given calcium supplements to pregnant women who were breastfeeding to lessen their absorption of lead from food and beverages. Okay? So please ensure that you're getting enough of the healthy minerals. And then you also want to boost your ability to produce the most important endogenous antioxidant our bodies make, called glutathione. And there are a couple of things you want to do that, which I think Joe can certainly talk about more effectively than me.
I'd like to add something to this, a little different from what Lara was saying, not in disagreement in any way, but saying while we're focusing this on bone, something I've been stunned by is the comments Lara has made as she's been looking at research. We talk about this all the time. And she talks about some particularly important thing about that helps bone. And I said, well, that's interesting. That particular pathway you're talking about, that also helps the heart be healthy. And then she talked about the issue about inflammation and decreasing and how inflammation increases loss of bone. And look at, well, wait, anything that increases inflammation increases all other chronic degenerative disease. And then she's talked about another aspect about particularly important trace mineral like magnesium being important for bone health. And I think, well, wait a minute. It's not just bone health, but if there's not enough magnesium around, mitochondria won't produce as much ATP, so people have lower energy. So when we're talking about all these things being important for bone health, it's all our physiology. If we don't have the minerals we need, if we have high levels of toxic minerals, our bodies just don't work, and we have more disease.
So it's a one-stop shop, right? You take care of your bones and take care of the rest of yourself. So, Joe, do you want to say a little bit about how to boost someone's production of glutathione?
It's hard to overstate the importance of glutathione in protecting us from environmental toxins, but also in terms of promoting our longevity. The reason this is important is because we are subjected to oxidative stress all the time. Now, the oxidative stress is kind of both a normal part of metabolism, but it's also a common pathway by which these metals and chemicals in the environment cause damage to our body. So in many ways in which our bodies protect ourselves from these oxidative stress is with glutathione. And it turns out that protecting us from oxidative stress, not only does it decrease disease, but it promotes longevity. When we look at research looking at multiple animal species, the more effective an animal species is at producing glutathione, the longer that animal species lives. It's quite fascinating. So what determines how much glutathione we have in our bodies? It turns out that the rate limiting step in the production of glutathione is the availability of cysteine. Where do you get cysteine from? Well, for example, dairy products are high in cysteine. And matter of fact, you may have heard about taking whey protein. Whey protein is very high in cysteine. And when people take whey protein, their glutathione levels go up. 16 grams of whey protein will increase our red blood cell glutathione levels by about 30%. There's another way of doing that, and that's with a dietary supplement called N-acetylcysteine, or NAC for short. So as low as 500 milligrams of NAC twice a day will once again increase RBC levels of glutathione by about 30%. So it's incredibly important. It protects the body from oxidative stress. It also protects the mitochondria. Now, as you know, mitochondria are what produce ATP in our cells, and ATP is energy that's used to make our enzyme systems work. So it turns out that in the production of ATP, a lot of free radicals are released in the mitochondria. And when we are healthy, the mitochondria are full of glutathione, and it helps get rid of those oxidants before they can cause damage. If there's not enough glutathione around, when those oxidants are being produced, they damage the mitochondrial DNA. And when the mitochondrial DNA becomes damaged, we become less able to produce energy.
So, and we also use glutathione in the liver. It's one of the most important pathways through which toxins get bound and then made soluble so we can eliminate them in urine. And so it's really important for, your toxin load overall to be producing enough glutathione. Another toxin clearing compound is curcumin. It's the anti-inflammatory compound that's found in turmeric. It binds to toxins like cadmium and lead and reduces their ability to cause damage to us. And you can get your curcumin in triple power, which is where it's present in an emulsified form. So it's much more bioavailable for you. Okay, the next recommendation we have is to ensure that your intake of EPA, the omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, is optimal because this is going to help lessen damage from POPs, or persistent organic pollutants. And Joe can tell you a lot more about what those are and why they're horrible and why you want to minimize your exposure to them as much as possible.
The key factor here is, once again, inflammation. We have way too much inflammation going on in our bodies. That's why so many diseases end in itis. Itis stands for inflammation. The level of inflammation in our body is hugely determined by the ratio of pro-inflammatory omega-6 fatty acids to anti-inflammatory omega-3 fatty acids. Now, as we evolved as a species, we consumed about 1-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids. But as we've gone to a more restricted diet, particularly a diet high in animal products and animal products that are being grown with grains, or animals are eating grains instead of things like grass, the ratio omega-6 to omega-3 is dramatically higher. As a matter of fact, I did a study in Canada where I looked at the omega-6, omega-3 fatty acid ratio in 4,500 oil field workers, and I found that the ratio was 20-to-1 of omega-6 to omega-1. Well, the problem is when you have that higher ratio, you get way too much inflammatory reaction in the body, which results in, yes, loss of bone, but increasing all of the other diseases. There's an inverse correlation between things like consumption of omega-3 fatty acids and breast cancer. Women who consume more omega-3 fatty acids have less breast cancer. They have less dementia. I can go on and on and on about the incredible benefits of omega-3 fatty acids. And I want to be clear here. While, yes, you can take dietary supplements of omega-3 fatty acids, like Triple Power, something we use, it's a great product. But it's going to be far more effective if you're also careful about decreasing the amount of omega-6s that you're consuming. There's not much point in doubling your omega-3 fatty acid levels if you also already have super high omega-6 fatty acid levels. You got to get the fatty acid levels down of the omega-6s. Optimally, I believe, has to be less than 4-to-1, ratio of 4 omega-6 to 1 omega-3s. Now, closer to 1-to-1, the better, but at least lower than 4.
And so that's why I very often suggest that people run the finger prick test that checks your omega-3 to omega-6 status so that you can know where you are and then tweak your diet a little bit if it's necessary. The other thing about EPA and DHA is it helps us get rid of the inflammation that the persistent organic pollutants are constantly producing in our bodies, because we're all exposed to these things. So, the POPs, persistent organic, can't say this 5 times, persistent organic pollutants are, these toxic man-made chemicals that are very stable. It takes eons for them to degrade and get cleared out. So they persist in the environment. They bioaccumulate in animal tissues and in human tissues. And many of them have been used as pesticides or herbicides. So they're very, very hard to completely avoid. POPs are a big problem for our bones because they cause chronic inflammation, and they're endocrine disruptors, which is another way they promote both bone loss and obesity. In fact, POPs are even now called, in the research, they're referred to as obesogens. Okay? They make people unhealthfully fat. So getting optimal amounts of EPA and DHA helps protect us against POPs, because we convert EPA and DHA into these compounds called the protectins, resolvins, and mericins, which then quickly resolve the inflammation that POPs produce, so they harm us a lot less. So the next thing we would like to recommend that you do is get plenty of citrate. Our kidneys are a primary means through which we excrete environmental toxins. And the citrate in citrus fruits, particularly grapefruit, which Joe has started drinking a lot more of lately, lemons and limes, and also in Strontium Boost, promotes an alkaline pH in our cells that helps protect our kidneys and supports their ability to eliminate toxins. So, Joe, could you share a little bit about why citrate and why kidney damage is so prevalent and why citrate is so helpful?
So we are suffering a kidney failure epidemic in our westernized society. As people get older, their EGFR, the measure of kidney function, gets worse and worse and worse. Those of us in environmental medicine learned that and when you look at the research, the kidneys play a huge role in getting rid of toxins. It may even be as important as or even bigger than the livers. Unfortunately for the kidneys, many of these toxins are very, very hard to get rid of. We've talked about cadmium, for example. So because cadmium is so toxic, the kidneys get out of the circulation as quickly as possible. But when it gets into the kidneys, it gets stuck there. So the half-life of cadmium in the kidneys is 16 years. Okay, so the cadmium is really bad stuff. Turns out that it's easier for the kidneys to get rid of toxins when we alkalinize the body. So those of us involved in environmental medicine soon learned that in order to get the toxins out of people's bodies, we had to give them various molecules that help them detox, help them alkalinize, as well as teaching them what's making their body more acidic and decreasing acidity. So with everything, I always say, first off, stop the cause. And the cause of excess acidity tends to be excessive consumption of salt. You might say, wait, how could salt, which is neutral pH, cause excess acidity? What happens is when people consume too much salt, which virtually everybody does, the kidneys have to work so hard to get rid of the salt, it's less able to get rid of acid compounds. Okay. The other one is sulfur-containing amino acids. And the primary source of sulfur-containing amino acids is meat protein. I'm not saying you have to be vegetarian. I'm not saying don't eat meat protein, but recognize the more meat protein people consume, the more acidic their bodies are, and the more the kidneys have to spend energy to get rid of acid, and there's less ability to get rid of environmental toxins. So another way to help alkalinize the body is give people citrates and bicarbonates. And I really like, and wherever possible, I always prefer a food solution to help improve people's health. So citrates work really well. It can be citric fruits. It can also be supplemental citrate. So one of the things I use a lot of is magnesium citrate, for example, because it's great at alkalinization. And we alkalinize the body, the kidneys get rid of these toxins more easily.
And Strontium Boost is a really good source of citrate. The 2-capsule dose of Strontium Boost contains 440 milligrams of citrate and 236 milligrams of strontium. So it's a really good source of citrate for those of you who are taking Strontium Boost. It will help detoxify, help your kidneys function to detoxify yourself. Okay, that's the next topic that we're going to cover is how to detoxify your body.